In 1870, travelers found Paraguay eerily silent. Villages filled only with widows, fields abandoned, nearly every man gone. This is not a legend. It is the aftermath of one dictator's delusion, a war that killed 90% of the nation's men and turned prosperity into ruin overnight. How did a country with railways and ironworks become history's ghost nation, and what force refused to let it vanish? In the middle of the 19th century, Paraguay stood apart from the rest of South America. While neighbors like Argentina and Brazil borrowed heavily from European banks, Paraguay kept its books balanced and its borders tightly guarded. The country's leaders, beginning with José Gaspar Rodríguez de Francia and followed by Carlos Antonio López, had enforced decades of isolation. Outsiders called Paraguay strange, even backward. But behind closed borders, a different story was unfolding. In 1854, a steam locomotive rolled out on South America's first railway, stretching from Asunción to the countryside. British engineers helped lay the track, but the vision and the funding were entirely Paraguayan. Iron foundries at Yibicui turned out cannon, plows, and rails, enough to arm an entire army and build the tools of industry. Telegraph wires linked distant towns, and state workshops produced everything from rifles to sewing needles. The government controlled foreign trade, keeping out the debts and influence that hobbled its rivals. By the early 1860s, Paraguay's treasury ran a surplus. The nation owed nothing to London, Paris, or Rio de Janeiro. Population estimates hovered around 500,000, mostly Mestizo and Guarani speaking, living in villages where land was distributed by the state. Fields of manioc, sugar, and tobacco stretched across the plains. The military, drilled and equipped by local industry, stood ready to defend the country's hard-won independence. In an era when most of the continent was defined by foreign loans and internal chaos, Paraguay had carved out a rare kind of stability, proud, self-sufficient, and seemingly untouchable. Francisco Solano López swept into power in 1862, the son of Paraguay's previous strongman, but determined to leave his own mark. He did not just inherit the presidency, he demanded a Congress vote that made him Marshal President for a decade, a title that echoed with military ambition. López surrounded himself with the trappings of European grandeur. In the heart of Asunción, he strutted through the palace in tailored French uniforms, gold epaulets gleaming, boots polished to a mirror shine. He studied portraits of Napoleon III and imagined himself a peer among emperors, not the ruler of a small landlocked republic. At his side stood Eliza Lynch, an Irish woman whose journey from famine-ravaged Cork to the salons of South America became the stuff of legend and scandal. Her arrival transformed the presidential court. Silk gowns arrived from Paris, and chandeliers glittered above banquets where officers and foreign dignitaries toasted to López's vision. The contrast between her luxury and the world outside the palace walls was impossible to ignore. López's ambitions ran far beyond parties and uniforms. He poured state resources into the army, drilling soldiers in the European style and expanding arsenals with iron from Yibicui. He spoke of Paraguay's destiny to shape the region, to stand equal with Brazil and Argentina, nations 10 times its size. The Marshal's Court became a stage for power, performance, and restless dreams of conquest. In the corridors of government and the echoing halls of the palace, the future of Paraguay began to twist around the will of one man, dressed for war and determined to remake the map of South America. In late 1864, Francisco Solano López gave the order that would ignite the continent. Paraguayan troops crossed into Brazil's Mato Grosso, seizing forts and towns in a bold strike. López claimed he was defending Uruguay's independence, but the real target was regional dominance. The invasion stunned Brazil, but López pressed further. In April 1865, he sent 25,000 soldiers across the Parana River into Argentina's Corrientes province, commandeering steamships and occupying the city. Argentina's government, led by Bartolomé Mitre, declared war. Within weeks, Uruguay's new rulers, installed with Brazilian help, joined the alliance against Paraguay. Diplomats gathered in Buenos Aires, drafting a secret pact on May 1, 1865. The Treaty of the Triple Alliance bound Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay together with a single goal: the total defeat of Paraguay. The treaty's clauses spelled out more than victory. Paraguay would be forced to pay for every bullet fired, every bridge destroyed. Its territory would be divided, Argentina claiming the Chaco, Brazil taking the north, Uruguay securing its border. The Allies promised never to make a separate peace. The treaty was kept secret, but word began to leak. In distant capitals, rumors swirled of a plan to erase Paraguay from the map. López had gambled everything on a lightning war. Now he faced 3 enemies, each with armies far larger than his own. The dream of regional glory had become a nightmare of encirclement. The war had begun, and there was no turning back. Paraguay's first taste of hope came at Curupayty in September 1866. Entrenched behind muddy ditches and cannon, Paraguayan soldiers watched as the combined armies of Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay advanced in perfect formation. The Allies lost thousands in a single afternoon, their bodies piling up in the swampy ground. For a moment, it seemed the impossible might happen, a tiny nation defying the giants that surrounded it. But victory at Curupayty was a brief illusion. The Allies regrouped, their numbers overwhelming. By mid-1868, Brazilian ironclads battered their way up the river, and the fortress of Humaita, once called the Gibraltar of South America, fell after a year-long siege. The road to Asunción lay open, and the noose tightened around López. With every defeat, the ranks of Paraguay's army thinned. Adult men were gone, buried in trenches or lost to fever. Desperate, López ordered the conscription of boys, some as young as 9. Parish records from 1868 show lists of children pressed into service, their names scrawled beside those of dead fathers and brothers. Boys in oversized uniforms, rifles dragging in the dust, marched toward enemy lines. On the home front, fear and suspicion replaced trust. López, convinced that betrayal lurked everywhere, unleashed a wave of purges. Officers who questioned his orders vanished overnight. Brothers, cousins, even his own mother fell under suspicion. Executions became routine, and loyalty no longer meant safety. As the war dragged on, Paraguay's world shrank to a landscape of hunger, suspicion, and child soldiers, each day more hopeless than the last. Cerro Coro was a patch of tangled forest and riverbank on Paraguay's far northern edge, the last hiding place for Francisco Solano López and the remnants of his shattered army. By March 1, 1870, his world had narrowed to a camp of a few hundred starving followers, many of them women and children. The Triple Alliance forces, tens of thousands strong, closed in from every direction, their scouts combing the hills and streams for any sign of movement. López, once a man of parades and proclamations, now wore a tattered uniform and carried a saber dulled by months of flight. Eyewitnesses from Brazil's advancing columns described the scene. López, gaunt and feverish, refused all offers of surrender, insisting he would rather die than yield. His Irish partner Eliza Lynch and their young son stood beside him as Brazilian troops finally found the camp at dawn. The last stand was over in minutes. López was surrounded, wounded in the chest, yet still tried to rise. A Brazilian officer demanded his surrender. López spat out his answer, "Muero con mi patria. I die with my country." A single sword thrust finished him. The war and the man who had waged it to the bitter end were gone. On that riverbank, with no army left to command and no country left to defend, López's refusal to surrender became his legacy, a final act of defiance that left Paraguay in ruins. The silence that followed was not peace, but the emptiness of a nation nearly erased. Paraguay stands as living proof that erasure is never guaranteed. Today, 90% of its people still speak Guarani, a language nearly wiped out with its nation. In a world quick to overlook the forgotten, survival itself becomes resistance. What else have we missed in the shadows of history?